Hmm. 1 second. Okay, so question 1, describing Agui and Ava, the parents. So I talked with group 2 about this question, and they gave some very interesting ideas. So first, they mentioned that this family can't really afford to send their children to school because their older son, Aji or Aji, can't afford the tuition. As we see here, uh, the teacher says, this is page 34, the semester is almost over, she was saying, and Jiang Aji still hasn't paid his tuition. And it doesn't seem like he'll ever be able to pay. So even though they can't afford it, the Jiang family still sends their 2 sons to school. Um, so we can see that, they really put their children in the first priority. Now, they also noticed that Agui did not send their daughter to school, even though she is their oldest child. Um, and they pointed out that this is a kind of traditional sexism where the future and education of the male children are often prioritized above that of the women or the female children. And yet, so we can see that Agui's parental love has her ideological limitations, but she tries to do the right thing for her children. And we can also see how much she cares about her children in the way that she always tries to get them to behave. Basically, every time she talks to her children, it's to get them not to do crazy things, to try to make them be good little kids. And we talked about this problem, group 2 and I. For example, here when they get to the hospital and they're looking for the restroom, her 2 sons come back from the restroom and say, "Oh, it's over there." She says to Aji, "You little brat, aren't you afraid of anything? Where do you think you are? What's the idea of running all over the place? Now, where is it? Take me there." So Aji does have the information that she needs, but before she asks him for that information, she feels the need to scold him a little first. So, uh, why does she raise her children like this? Group 2 says that this is quite a traditional way of raising children to make sure that they behave, and treating that as more important than making sure that they are comforted and loved and supported and things like that. But like the deep rooted reason here seems also to be related to their poverty. Group 2 noticed that there are 5 children in this household. There's only one mother to keep track of them all during the day. And children have a habit of running around and not following adult rules. So, what happens if a child breaks a rule or breaks a thing or breaks a person and they have to pay? They can't. They don't even have money for tuition, let alone compensation. So, for a family who lacks resources, it can be seen as more important to make sure the children don't get into trouble. And then all of that love and kindness and support comes second. So this has apparently become a habit for Agui. Even when she does benefit from her children running around, she feels the need to scold them first anyway. Um, Related to their lack of resources is Agui's reaction to her husband being run over. If we remember the scene in the car, so this is on page 38. So she's crying, she's sobbing, and then she gets into the car and she's kind of surprised at what the inside of the car is like. The unexpected opulence of the interior bring her crying to an abrupt halt. Before they had driven very far, Agwe realized that she'd stopped crying the minute she was seated in the car, making her mournful cries of a moment earlier seem a bit contrived, a bit fake. She soon recommenced babbling and sobbing, and before long was giving rein to her grief with loud wails. So on the one hand, she does feel sad. It's her loving husband, hardworking husband, who was hit by the car. On the other hand, she is very aware that her behavior is being observed. And so, for a person in her situation, she needs the support and help of other people. She needs to convince people to treat her better, because if they don't, she may not have the resources to deal with this situation. So I don't think she's aiming for money, but she instinctively feels like she has to make herself look pitiful so that others will want to help her. Now, for someone with more resources, this may not be their first reaction. For someone who doesn't desperately need others' help, they might want to keep their emotions inside until they get to a private space. But for Agwe, the the benefits of expressing her emotions far outweigh any consideration of face or tact or politeness. Um, Group 2 also talked about Afa the father. We don't really see him until late in the story when he wakes up. Um, but the first of all, he of course asks about his legs. But the second thing he asks about are his kids. So we can see that he is a caring father. He does care about his kids and his family. Later on this page 45, he thinks, why haven't I died? Why not just get it over with? How will they manage if I live on like this? So he's also here putting his family before himself. He is a very caring father. And then later on, his coworkers and his boss stop by, and we see him interacting with them. And it says here on page 49, the foreman and Huotu entered the room without a single consoling word. As always, they giggled and laughed and said things like, wow, what a life. Nothing but lying in bed, eating and crapping. As for the rest of us, nothing's changed. We're still working like animals. Who could have it better than you? So we can see that his relationship with his coworkers is also very good. They're not coming in afraid and timid and anxious, as if they're strangers. They walk in like they're just part of the family, joking and laughing. So whether it's with his family or with his coworkers, Afa seems like an all-around good guy, hardworking guy. But we also have this scene where he almost gets into an argument with his wife. This is on page 46. So this is right after Akwe is once again complaining about his career choices. This is Akwe. You said women don't understand and that we should try our luck in a big city. Finding work isn't the same as opening a business. What kind of luck is there to try? No, there's luck all right, and we just found our share, haven't we? And then Aju, the older daughter, says, Mama, that's enough. Aju cried out anxiously. She saw her father's face turning livid with anger, though he didn't say a word. And she knew that if her mother kept it up much longer, he'd explode with rage, after which nothing could calm him down. Atsu had witnessed such scenes many times. This was how their arguments always started. So even for this all-around good guy, loving father, good colleague, good friend, he also has an uncontrollable rage, especially every time his wife starts complaining about his job or their income. And so I asked group two, why do you think such a good man would have so much anger? And group two's answer is that maybe it's because of his stress. He's working all day. He's trying his best to earn as much money as he can. He knows it's not enough, but he also doesn't know how to earn more. And so that stress could turn into prideful anger. Like he has his pride that he's already doing his best. He shouldn't be scolded. So anytime they get onto this topic, that anger might burst out. And something similar can be said for his wife, Agui, as well, if we keep reading. Agui herself was well aware of the fact, but whenever matters reached this stage, she was powerless to avoid the inevitable results. So she also knows that this topic makes Afa mad very fast. But when she starts talking about it, she can't stop. And group two said this also could be related to her stress. As we mentioned earlier, she's the homemaker. She's the person keeping her 5 kids under control. And I'm sure it's a lot of trouble doing that. So, if they had more resources, maybe they could send their children to like kindergarten or hire a nanny, but they can't. And so this is also a situation that they can't help but deal with. So every time she thinks about this, she also feels the need to vent her stress. That could be why she knows it'll lead to an argument, but she can't stop either. So overall, we have a general picture of a married husband and wife who love their kids, love their family. The husband also is on good relations with his work colleagues, but their poverty leads to some negative behavior in reaction, whether it's how Agui tries to keep her kids in line, or whether it's Afa's reaction to their main topic of argument related to their income. Do you guys have other thoughts about this question? Okay, if not, let's move on to question 2. Why do you think the story gives the Jiang family a mute daughter? So I was talking with group, I forgot your number. 1? Group 3, yes. I was talking with group 3 about this question. And one way we can think about this question is we can think about what would the story feel like if they did not have this mute daughter? What would be different? So the first time we see a mute girl, we don't know that she's part of this family. And neither does the American who sees her. But then when he realizes that she is part of this family that he's trying to apologize to and compensate, he has a very strong reaction, the American. So here, the mute daughter has walked into the house, has realized what's going on. On page 33, is she your sister? The policeman asked in disbelief. Azu nodded. Skipping a paragraph. Oh my God, the foreigner softly muttered for the second time. So when the American learns that they have a mute daughter, he has a strong reaction. And I was asking group 3, why? Why do you think he has such a strong reaction? One answer they gave is that the American has already been walking around this slum for a while looking for this family. He walks in, one look around, he can tell that this is quite a poor family. And then he learns they have a mute daughter. So like this family's living situation is already bad enough. They also have to take care of a mute daughter. The American, who himself is not poor, might feel overwhelmed at this situation. He perhaps had never witnessed a family in such dire straits before. Um, and group three also mentioned that the fact that the daughter is mute, she can't talk, could also be a symbol for this family in general, in the fact that they find it hard to make themselves heard by other people. Throughout the story, it's mentioned a few times that they can't communicate with the policeman, they can't communicate with the American because they only speak Taiwanese. And the policeman only doesn't speak Taiwanese very well, right? The policeman tried to comfort her by saying in halting Taiwanese, which means he is not very fluent. So throughout the story, the Jiang family finds it hard to communicate. There are a few moments where there's miscommunication, though it's not very serious. Only near the end, when they meet that Catholic nurse who is white, do they find someone who understands Taiwanese. Um, so the mute daughter can also be a symbol of how hard it is for them to make themselves heard, to make other people understand what they're saying. I guess we can talk about the nurse, right? So the only person who can understand them is a white American Catholic nun. So like missionaries have traditionally played a role connecting two cultures, but of course they have a purpose. Their purpose is they want more people to believe in their religion. So on the one hand, it feels like a lifeline to the Jiang family. Finally, somebody understands us. But this lifeline has a kind of danger hidden behind it that they probably are not aware of. And we see this when uh, the nun, she says one thing related to her religion in this story. It's a short story. There's not a lot of space for many different things to happen. But the story does give her one line. Let's see, where is it? The section is called well, okay, the winged angel is sorry, the winged angel. It's where the nurse appears. And then there's a section called Blessed Are the Believers. So on page, I'm gonna say 47. Yes, 46. Uh, Finally, they call the nurse after Afa wakes up. The nurse comes in, sticks a thermometer into his mouth, and then she says, "Do you believe in God?" Seeing that Agwe had nothing to say, she continued, "There are blessings for those who believe. If you believe in God, good things will happen." And this is kind of funny. As soon as she says that, the American and the policeman enter with several bags full of things in their arms, as if making her words come true. The mere mention of God brings good things. I think that's kind of funny. Um, but in reality, the situation is the nurse is kind of using their moment of weakness to try to get them to believe in her God. It's a kind of uh, I don't want to say that it's a threat, but it's a kind of possible change that maybe the Jiang family don't know to be aware of. Um, so like this is the opposite of the mute daughter, right? The mute daughter can't talk, but she can communicate with her body language. The one person who can talk to the Jiang family has an ulterior motive. another separate reason for knowing the language. And then finally, related to the mute daughter, the American uh, doesn't just offer them money, right? On page 47. Additionally, he hopes that you will permit him to send your mute daughter to a special school in the United States. So if the story did not have this mute daughter, then Colonel Grant would simply be offering them money and food. But because the mute daughter exists in this story, he can also offer some support specifically for her. Now, on the surface, this makes him seem like a real human being. He's not just throwing money at the problem, he's finding what the family seems to need and giving them the support to help them get it. That immediately raises the first question, which is, does the mute daughter need to be sent to a special school in the United States? To me, maybe not. Like, her family don't make a big deal of the fact that she's mute. The policeman also doesn't seem to care that she's mute. It's only the American who is very surprised. So maybe it is mostly for the American that this disability needs to be taken care of, so to speak. But for everyone else, the mute daughter just is leading her own life, an ordinary life. There's no big issue here. So this is an example of a kind of support that they aren't asking for, but the American offers anyway. He says it's a special school. Do you guys know what that means? Like what kind of school he's talking about? Neither does the Jiang family. They don't know what he's offering. They just know it's a school in the United States, so it must be better, right? It could be worse, but they never considered that possibility. From what I understand, the special school in this moment of history would be focusing on trying to teach deaf and mute children how to speak. Not sign language, but like how to mimic uh, the human voiced language that we hearing people learn naturally. It's kind of like trying to teach you Chinese by forcing you to repeat the sounds without connecting them to words. It's a very unnatural way of learning how to speak a language. And of course, the mute daughter doesn't speak English in any kind of English. So what looks like a grand charitable gesture doesn't really fit the Jiang family's needs and probably won't help their daughter either. So the first level was, it looks like a kind thing for the American to do. It kind of humanizes him. The second layer is, it is a form of American imperialism to think that whatever an American offers must be better than what they already have. And the third layer is, it's not even the American who's paying. As it says here, his organization is willing to assume full responsibility. You know, the American comes here to apologize, and it feels like he means it. He does feel bad about hitting Afa with his car. But he himself doesn't really suffer any consequences. It's his organization that's paying for him, that's putting up all of these resources, that's probably even paying for this hospital visit. This was, of course, way before Taiwan had a national health insurance plan. So there's a part of the story where Afa is like, how are we paying for this hospital? And they're not. The Americans' organization is paying for it. The American's name and title is Colonel Grant. So this organization is probably the US military. So with these three layers, If we go back to the first layer, offering the mute daughter special assistance makes Colonel Grant look more human. But now that we see, even if he does feel sincere in his apology, all of this stuff that he's offering is not really for the Zhang family. It is for the Americans, so that people see that the Americans are offering help. In today's language, we would call this PR crisis management. Okay, do you have other thoughts about this question, the mute daughter in this story? Okay, question 3, very closely related. Why do the Americans consider Taiwan the most secure Asian country? This is related to, why is there an American colonel in Taiwan? Why is there an American nurse who speaks Taiwanese? Why do the Americans have their own hospital and it's built on top of a mountain, which is, a very good location? If we go to the very beginning of the story, that phone call, or the second page of the story, the first page is the accident. Page 30. Line 2, a junior secretary like me can easily handle a matter like this. So I guess he is representing Colonel Grant's organization. He's getting a phone call from somebody saying, hey, Colonel Grant hit somebody. What do we do? Should we call like the secretary of so-and-so? And he says, no, 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 a guy like me, a lower level guy like me, is more than enough to deal with this. And apparently, the other person on the phone doesn't understand why. So this junior secretary tries to explain. Now hold on a moment. Listen to me. Don't forget, we're in Asia now. The other fellow is just a laborer. You know what? I bet the other person is Colonel Grant. I bet it's Colonel Grant calling his boss to see what he should do, and his boss's junior secretary is talking to him. And so the secretary says, we're in Asia now. The other fellow is just a laborer. What does that mean? He's just a working class stiff. We don't have to take him seriously. We can throw money at the problem and make him go away. And also that line, we're in Asia now, as compared to the United States. If you hit somebody in the US with your car, maybe the other person will make more of a fuss. Maybe they might threaten to sue you. But in Asia, no. Apparently, this secretary is saying, in Asia, they don't think about suing you. They don't think about causing a problem. And no matter how accurate this might be, regardless of whether this observation is accurate or not, the assumption that Asian people will make less of a fuss when they get hit by a car is kind of racist. Like, human beings are human beings. If I get hit by a car, I suffer no matter what race I am. So to assume that I won't want to make a fuss is kind of racist. And then, of course, saying that he's just a laborer is classist. It's a discrimination on the basis of class. Next line. So there, he can't afford any trouble, right? So he doesn't have the money to cause a fuss. Continuing. Let me finish. This is the Asian country with which we have the closest ties of friendship. Besides, it's the most secure. So this is what the question is asking. What does he mean? Friendship does not mean we're good buddies. Secure does not mean safe. We'll come back to this. Next line. America has no intention of jumping into the middle of a quagmire. Our president and our people all feel that way. So I'm pretty sure this is talking about the political situation between Taiwan and China. Um, Not quite sure why Colonel Grant thought this might cause an international incident related to China. Um, but it does show you that, especially for Americans at that time and even today, when you mention Taiwan, they think about the problem with China. That seems to be the one thing most people think about Taiwan. And then if they're business people, the second thing they think about is TSMC and semiconductors and silicon chips. Most people don't really spend too much time thinking about the people who live here in Taiwan, how we feel about the situation. So that's an example of this. Even when Colonel Grant hits somebody with his car, in his thought process, he's thinking about, oh no, what about China? For some strange reason. Okay, so we can come back to this idea of friendship and security. So I was talking with group 3 about this question, and they were saying, the presence of foreign policemen and MPs and all of these foreigners on Taiwan, at the time the US was helping Taiwan develop its economy, which is true. Although in the 60s, Taiwanese businesses started aggregating capital of their own, starting to become less dependent on American help, but still dependent. So when we say that the Americans are helping to develop the economy, what exactly does that mean? What are the Americans doing? They are persuading the government to open up foreign investment. They are inviting companies to invest in Taiwan. If there are no good businesses to invest in already, they are inviting companies to come here and set up businesses and hire workers. If the workers don't know what to do, they are bringing in foreign workers to teach them. And because it's America, most of these companies and workers are probably Americans. So the result of economic assistance is that you have more Americans, more American companies coming into Taiwan. Does it help the economy? Yes. But also, what the Americans give, the Americans can take away. So it also puts pressure on the government and society to try not to piss off the Americans, because if they leave, they're taking all of that with them. So economic support translates into political influence. And this is basically what we mean when we talk about things like neo-colonialism. The original colonialism was straightforward pillage, plunder, slavery. But neo-colonialism is economic control leading to political influence. So that's probably what they mean by friendship, close ties, mutual investment, although mutual here means one-sided. And so by secure, they seem to be saying uh, people in Taiwan are less likely to cause a problem for Americans because of this economic and political influence. So secure doesn't mean safe. Secure means the Americans will have less trouble doing what they want. So when you watch the news and some American official talks about the security situation, keep this in mind. And of course, the reason Taiwan is welcoming US economic support is related to American support during the Second World War against communist China, against Japan. And then during the Chinese Civil War, support against communist China, which ties into the whole Cold War anti-communist effort led by the United States. So it's U.S. Taiwan relations, but it's also part of the U.S. global strategy of geopolitics. There's also a layer to do with Chiang Kai-shek's personal ties to the American government, Western religion. I don't want to talk about all that. Do you have other thoughts or questions about this one? Okay, well, let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk about questions 4 and 5, and then I'll introduce next week's unit. Sorry, I mean in 2 weeks. Next week is a holiday. Question 4. Why does the monetary compensation make the Jiang family feel like they may have done something wrong and offended someone? So I was talking to group 5 about this question. Let's take a look at the story. Page somewhere around here. Near the end of the story. Page 48, first paragraph. So this is right after Colonel Grant has offered them compensation, the special school, bags of food. 20,000! This nearly made their heads swim. But since the money was right there in front of them, something had to be said. But what? What should they say? All this indecision gave them the uneasy feeling that they'd done something wrong and offended someone. So we have two elements here: the money and a feeling of indecision. So group 5 noted that this is probably more money than the Jiang family had ever seen in one place their entire life. So the fact that the Jiang family is used to thinking about money as wage for labor. They do some work, they earn some money. How much work would you have to do to earn 20,000? It's probably more work than they can think of doing. So this really screws with their idea of what it means to have this much money. To them, it feels like they don't deserve it. They didn't work for it. They didn't earn it. Why are they getting it now? But of course, Afa is now incapacitated. He does deserve some compensation, but the Jiang family probably was not expecting this much. And so if they don't feel like they deserve it, when somebody gives it to them, it feels like maybe they did something wrong, like they're taking it away from somebody else. If to them, if one person gives them 20,000, they get 20,000, but the other person loses 20,000. Now, of course, this is not what rich people think, right? To rich people, depending on how rich the person is, 20,000 might feel like literally nothing. Depending on how they invest their money, they might make 20,000 a day. Especially for a large organization such as the US military. Fun fact, the US military, the US Defense Department, has never once passed an audit. So like when an accountant goes and looks at their budget and looks at how they spent their money to see where all the money went, they have never once been able to explain where all of their money went. They have literally so much money they cannot keep track. So what is 20,000 to them? Nothing. So like this is a completely different logic of money from what the Jiang family understands. So it feels wrong. According to their logic, something is wrong here. And because they are getting the benefit, they must be the person doing something wrong. And because it feels strange to them, it creates a moment of indecision. There's money on the table. Should they take it? How should they take it? What justification should they give for taking it? To them, none of this makes sense. And so there's a second layer on top of this, right? Which is karma. If they take what doesn't belong to them, they'll have to pay it back later in some other form. Now, to us, we understand that karma is working in the opposite direction. They are a hardworking family who love each other and support each other. And so when something bad happens to their main breadwinner, karma balances out by giving them something good. But to the Jiang family, it's overbalanced. It's too much good stuff in comparison to how they understand their current situation. Okay. Thoughts or questions about this one? Okay, and number 5, the story's title, The Taste of Apples. So I was talking to group 1 about this one. Let's jump to page 49. No, no, no. Keep going. 50, page 50. So one of the many foods that Colonel Grant brings in are some apples. Apples are not indigenous to Taiwan. They're foreign. They have to be imported. And the Jiang family can't afford to buy foreign food. In fact, if you notice, there's a detail near the front of the story, the accident. It describes the scene of the accident, right? There's a bicycle, a pickaxe, the contents of a lunchbox, mainly rice, along with the solitary salted egg. So not only can they not afford foreign food, they can barely afford Taiwanese food. Afa is a laborer. He works with his body and hands. He needs energy, but his main source of protein isn't meat, it's an egg. That's how poor they are. So when we go back to page 50, they are now faced with this foreign food. None of them has ever eaten one before. What the only thing they know about this food is that it's American and it's foreign. Therefore, it must be good, right? But when they actually eat the apple, they felt that the apples weren't quite as sweet as they had imagined. They have an idea of what an apple might taste like, this representative of a better foreign culture, a more expensive culture. But in fact, it doesn't taste that good. Rather, they were a little sour and pulpy, and when chewed, they were frothy and not quite real. But then they were reminded of their father's comment that one apple cost as much as 4 caddies of rice, and with that, the flavor was enhanced. So not only is it a symbol of better things, foreign things, the idea literally changes how it tastes to them. So in a sense, we can say they're not eating apples, they're eating their idea of an apple. And it's also worth noting who is the first person to know what to do. Aji, the oldest son, the second child, oldest son. And he knows how to do it because he saw someone eating an apple on TV. TV, of course, is a symbol of modernity, modern culture, modern technology. Apples, in this sense, are also a symbol of modernity because it is the modern economy that imported apples into Taiwan. And so it is, of course, a child, Aji, who is more in tune with modern trends, the changing of society. It is this guy who knows what to do with an apple, and not the parents who are the traditional source of authority. If we start thinking about this story in terms of a traditional family's encounter with modern culture and new technologies and new social changes, then the whole story starts feeling like a collision with modernity. Literally, Afar got into a collision with an American driving a modern car on a modern road. Then they are brought in another modern car to a high-tech American hospital. And now they're faced with imported food thanks to the modern economy. So it's a story of a traditional family's collision with modernity. In fact, if you pay close attention to how the accident happened, you might notice something. Let's see. Afa talking to Colonel Grant. Here, page 47. Aha! So it was you. You ought to be more careful. I saw your car coming a long way away, so I pulled over to let you pass. I never thought you'd come right at me. And then the first paragraph, the accident takes place on a two-laned highway across a double yellow parallel line. If you look at 29, crushing it on the other side of the yellow dividing line of the two-lane highway. So if you have driven in Taiwan before, you know that the yellow line separates the two different directions. If you cross the yellow line, you are going into oncoming traffic. So one of these two people crossed to the other side. And from Afa's comments, it looks like he was the one who crossed. I pulled over to let you pass. So I think what happened was that the road was not straight. There was like a bend in the road. So to Afa, it looks like the car is coming right at him. So he pulled to the left, crossed the line without understanding what the line was to let the car pass. But then the car followed the line and hit Afa. So the reason for the accident is also because Afa does not understand the rules of modern traffic. He probably comes from a rural village or town from the south. It says they're from the south, a place that does not have a modern highway or a modern main road. It's probably a road with no markings or even a dirt road. So he doesn't know what these markings mean. So he accidentally pulled into oncoming traffic and crashed into the car head on. So in fact, it's Afa who is at fault, which adds yet another layer to this situation. Afa broke traffic rules, but it's because he didn't understand traffic rules. And that is the dark side to a modernizing society and a modernizing economy. Things change, often too fast for some people to keep up with. When things change, rules change. And if you can't keep up with things, it's easy for you to break the rules and suffer some kind of punishment that you do not understand. In this case, Afa is fortunate. Due to the political situation, the Americans would rather the problem go away and not pursue who's right or who's wrong legally. And all of this is happening in the background. The Zhang family has no idea about any of these considerations. To them, all they see is their main breadwinner is injured and can't work, but now they also have a lot of money. That's all they see. Everything else is the author putting it into the story so that we understand what's really happening. Finally, on the point of the apples, at first Afa says he doesn't want one. But then at the very last line of the story, Aju, he said, hand me one of those. So even Ava, who is the main victim of all of these symbols of modernity, is enticed enough to want to participate in modern culture by partaking of this imported fruit. So the fact that at the very end he also asks for an apple shows like the last step of this family into modern Taiwanese society. Okay, do you have other thoughts or questions about this one? Like it's the taste of apples, but it's actually the taste of modern society. And as it says, it's not exactly a perfect taste. It's a little sour, it's a little pulpy, and it's not quite real. Just like modern society. Okay, do you have any other thoughts or questions about this story? Okay, if not, next week is a holiday. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the next story, Haruki Murakami's Barn Burning. So, Haruki Murakami, Japanese author, famous guy. But he's not exactly a representative of traditional Japanese literature. He's a novelist who likes to write stories that are often surreal, that are called magical realism, which means it looks kind of normal, but then you also have weird fantasy elements or science fiction elements that aren't explained very well, or sometimes the story doesn't even try to explain them. So characters are put in strange situations, weird things happen, and they just kind of take it and they keep going. Magical realism is a style of writing that is most closely connected to writers from South America, but gradually more and more authors have been recognized as writing this kind of fiction. Murakami is the best Japanese example. Now, of course, traditional Japanese literature also has weird stuff like, ghosts and superstitions and supernatural elements and deities and things like that. But Murakami doesn't often use that tradition of weird stuff. He uses a more Western tradition of weird stuff. So he's kind of perfect for a world literature course because he's writing in Japanese, but not using a lot of Japanese culture. And so Japanese people, to my understanding, kind of feel like he's a weird kind of guy writing weird stories, whereas international readers who read him in English think that he's a great representative of this kind of writing in the world. He is often nominated for the Nobel Prize. He has not won yet. The story we're going to read, Barn Burning, is a very good example of that style where weird shit happens. Nobody knows why, but they just kind of go with it. The story is also related to class in a way. You have ordinary people, a man and a young woman, and then you have a rich young man who becomes the young woman's boyfriend, but feels kind of strange. And during one scene where the main character, the older man, um, and the young man are talking, the young man says, "You know what I like to do for fun? I like to burn barns." And things develop from there. Now, in terms of literary influence, this story is incredibly fascinating because it sits in between two other works of literature. This story was later adapted into a Korean film called Burning from, I believe, 2017, which is actually a very good film if you want to check that one out, from Lee Chang-dong. But previous to this, Barn burning is also the title of a short story published in 1939 by William Faulkner. Faulkner is one of the titans of American literature, and he wrote about families and society in the American South, where the economy is more agricultural and the lingering effects of slavery are more apparent. Generally speaking, in the United States, the US South has lower education levels, has a less industrialized economy, has lower living standards. It's kind of the lower quality of life, lower class part of the US. And Faulkner wrote about that society, trying to introduce it to the rest of the US. Like not rumors or stereotypes, but what people really thought and cared about in that society or in that part of society. But Faulkner did not use a realist style. He wasn't writing stories saying, look, this is exactly what it's like. He also used symbolism and supernatural elements and blood and gore and incest and historical stories to tell the rest of, to show the rest of the US this is what it feels like to live in the US South. So there's a connection between the styles of these two writers. It's not straightforwardly realist. There's always something else happening that you don't quite understand, that the characters don't quite understand. But that other stuff has a big impact on what happens on the surface. Now, Faulkner's story, Barn Burning, is about a young child who has to deal with his tyrannical, abusive, antisocial father. And in that story, whenever someone pisses off his father goes and burns down their barn. The problem, of course, is what pisses off his father. It turns out anything pisses off his father. If you try to get his father to do anything, you give him an order, you give him a penalty, anything could set him off. And you might wake up one night looking at your barn on fire. And the Faulkner story is about what the young child, what the young boy does. How does he deal with his father like this? How does he grow into his own manhood? What he decides to do with his life. This story is not that kind of story. Yes, something happens, but that something may or may not be a barn burning down. Yes, someone makes a decision, but that decision may or may not be leaving the situation behind. By the end of the story, it's really not easy to say what exactly has happened. And that makes the story even more fun. Okay, do you have questions about this? So next week, don't come to class. If you do come, I won't be here. You're going to sit here alone in the dark. And before 2 weeks, please finish the story and come ready to discuss with your classmates. If you're new here, the course packet PDF is on Moodle. It's called Course Packet. There might still be some paper copies left in the IC, don't know. I'm recording this. I will upload it to YouTube and post a link to the playlist on Moodle. And I'm recording it because YouTube will automatically generate a searchable transcript. So you can open the transcript, search for the keywords, click on that line, and the video will jump to that place. So it saves you time if you want to review. And that will be uploaded tonight or tomorrow. Okay, questions about anything? Great. See you in 2 weeks.